I'm a Generation X kid, born at the end of the 60s and raised in England. Yes, my age group grew up during a worldwide recession with mass unemployment, inflation, the long overdue end of empire, the constant threat of global thermonuclear war, riots, the Cold War, inner city decay, AIDS and terrorism. But you know what? It made us a pretty resilient bunch. But I think it's fair to say that no matter how tough you are and whether you're a Gen X like me, or millennial, Gen Z or a boomer, COVID has had a massive impact on everyone's lives, whether they caught the virus or not. It's impacted our family lives, our work lives, and also the stuff we do for fun, such as photography. 2.5 years in, we're now entering the post-pandemic phase of this virus, or at least what we here in Australia might call a "she'll be right mate" phase. And as we slowly transition back to a vague approximation of what our lives were like before the bloody virus, it has allowed us to pick up the stuff we did when we weren't paying the rent, things like photography. But if you're anything like me, you might have found that you've lost a bit of your fojo and that you're finding it hard to pick up where you left off. So what can be done? How can we get back into the groove? How can we relight the fire and be enthused once more by our photography? Before I get any further into this, I know there's a small percentage of the population who take a, shall we say, conspiratorial stance on things like lockdowns, the efficacy of vaccines, and the very existence of the virus itself. And while this video is not really about any of that bollocks, if you do fall into that small demographic, it'll probably trigger you anyway. So it might be best to save yourself the elevated blood pressure and jog on now. I won't take it personally if you give this one a miss and join me on the next one. Alright, where was I? Oh yeah. Now, of course, the impacts of COVID on a hobby like photography were substantial. And one of the most difficult to deal with was the dreaded lockdown. In my country and in many countries around the world, we had movement restrictions in place, which made doing landscape photography somewhat problematic, since the only landscape that most people had access to was a window box, the back garden or the local park. And in the grand scheme of things, we actually had it pretty easy down here in South Coast, New South Wales. Even during the tightest lockdown period here, I could still go to the beach and hike in the hills, and I could do so without breaking any rules. And whilst we were only supposed to go out for exercise, I always took my camera along with me because why the fuck not? During the second lockdown in New South Wales, we were restricted to our local council regions, the Shoalhaven Council region in my case. This was annoying, but since the Shoalhaven is a quarter of the size of Wales and includes the whole of Jervis Bay and several massive national parks, I should have been able to carry on my photography as normal. But you know what? I didn't. One of the key issues for me has been the disruption of routines. I used to get up for sunrises and sunsets on a regular basis, and that has almost completely stopped. I just got out of the habit, and it's been really hard trying to re-establish those routines because other ones have taken their place. I've always been a pretty heavy drinker. Over the last couple of years, as we've all dealt with this virus and its effects on our lives, my alcohol intake has gone up. As you may have noticed, I am a pretty big bloke. I've always been able to drink, but things have certainly accelerated during the old lockdowns. Booze disrupts your sleep, dehydrates you, and if you really go for it, punishes you with a hangover the next day. None of these things are conducive to getting out and taking photographs in nature, particularly when it requires an early start or a late night. And there's also the trust issue. Now, for us landscape photographers, we're often quite a long way from the next human being. But if you shoot street photography, urban sports or concerts, then you're going to be in close proximity to other people. And if you have concerns about contracting the virus from other people, then that's going to make you nervous about being around them. Here in New South Wales, an amazing 95% of the population are double jabbed. And as of April 2022, we're over 60% triple jabbed as well. When you combine that level of immunisation with 1, the odds of being in proximity to someone with the virus, and 2, the odds of having symptoms if you do get it, then it's clear we probably shouldn't be so nervous about getting out and about again. Yet, based on my own experiences and how I've seen other local photographers behaving, this isn't the case. I suspect it will be a while until many folks are completely at ease with being around people. And of course, some folks with underlying health issues have unfortunately seen the entire trajectory of their lives irrevocably altered. And then there's the folks actually caught the bloody virus and were hit badly by it. Now, I've had full-blown influenza in the past, not just man flu, the real deal, and so I know how debilitating these sorts of viruses can be. Most people are fine after a lousy week or two of flu-like symptoms, but some people suffer ongoing issues. I know of one photographer who used to go on hikes in the backcountry and now has trouble walking a couple of kilometres, and that's a good 9 months after they caught the virus. COVID wreaked havoc with the world of work too. Many people were furloughed for extended periods and lots lost their jobs completely, and the last thing you want to do when you're struggling to pay the fucking rent is go and take little pretty pictures of the scenery. So there's a whole range of physical, organisational, economic and mental issues associated with this virus. Collectively, these issues have crushed an interest in photography for many folks, and their camera equipment is collecting dust on the shelf. Perhaps you find yourself in this position, and you may be wondering if there is a way back. Now, I'm no self-help guru. In fact, as someone with several serious neurodevelopmental disorders and a personality that might best be politely described as self-contained, I'm actually quite the opposite. However, here's a few things that I've done that I found to help, and if they help you too, then that's cool. Step 1. I started by going to familiar locations that I used to visit regularly pre-COVID. Because I feel at ease in those locations, because I had happy memories and positive feelings about the places, it was much easier to get back into the swing of things. You want to take it easy on yourself at the start, and so taking photographs in locations you love is the path of least resistance. Step 2, I do not set any goals regarding my photography. In the past, I've found that having some specific mission in mind is a great way of motivating yourself to get out and about with a camera, but as I was easing back into it, I just let things unfold naturally. I didn't want to set myself up for failure by trying some new technique or going to a new location, so I kept it as simple as possible. I've always been an impromptu sort of a photographer anyway. I just went out with the camera and photographed whatever came my way. Low expectations in this regard meant a low chance of disappointment. The idea is to not set yourself up for failure by overcomplicating it. Step 3 is to build up momentum. It's tempting to charge back into it. I suggest just easing your way back into things and slowly building up your old routines. Don't treat it like something you have to do, or it will turn into a chore which will bugger things up before you've given it a good chance. Now, I'm happiest in my own company when I go out taking photographs, and I always said that was because I have autism, but the missus just reckons I'm an antisocial old bastard, so take your pick. However, if you're a more normally adjusted individual who enjoys being around other people, then that might be a way back into photography. So step 4 is to hit up your photography buddies and see if they fancy joining you photographing a certain location. My wife tells me that having a friend with you when you practice a hobby is a nice thing, and the camaraderie might be just what you need to relight those dormant creative fires. Most of us come to photography because we're enthused by the things we see, and we want to share them with people. So step 5 is to remember why you were enthused in the first place, and actually the easiest way of doing that is to remember to take your eye away from the camera viewfinder occasionally and just enjoy the scene and drink in the atmosphere without stressing about capturing it in some unique way. Alright, that's all I've got for you guys. Has COVID kicked the ever-loving shit out of your photography? Or are you back to business as usual? Do let me know in the comments below, and as always, hit the old like button if you enjoyed the video, and consider subscribing, that's the button slightly to the right there, to see more of my content and nudge me ever closer to the 1,000 subscriber mark and the happy hunting grounds of monetization. Till the next time, guys, ta-ta.